Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy faced protests last week across the country after signing a controversial bill on Tuesday that critics say will neuter the independence of two prominent anti-corruption bodies. The passing of the new legislation last week prompted protests in Kyiv and other major cities across Ukraine, with demonstrators even violating the nighttime curfew imposed as a guard against nightly Russian drone and missile strikes. Our correspondent Zivo joined us from Ukraine with the latest.
Protesters gathered in the streets of Kyiv last week after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy unexpectedly hollowed out the independence of his country's main anti-corruption agencies by placing them under his office's authority. The changes to Ukraine's anti-corruption system were implemented via a series of last-minute amendments to a law that was passed last Tuesday. Ukrainian parliamentarians said that they were not notified of these amendments beforehand, and that they faced intense pressure from the president's office to vote for the law despite their reservations. Zelenskyy justified his reforms by arguing that the agencies in question were compromised by Russian interference, and that important corruption cases had been left to languish for years without resolution. Ukrainian citizens and civil society actors generally did not believe this explanation, though, and felt that the reforms constituted a presidential power grab that eroded Ukraine's democratic norms. Thousands protested in front of Zelensky's office across several nights, despite the risk of Russian missiles and drone strikes, while smaller demonstrations broke out in over a dozen major Ukrainian cities, such as Lviv, Kharkiv, and Odessa. Collectively, they amounted to the largest wave of civil unrest in Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion began 3 years ago. European leaders were similarly condemnatory, with the EU suspending $1.7 billion in aid to Ukraine that had been contingent on the implementation of greater anti-corruption measures. Facing intense domestic and international pressure, Zelenskyy immediately made a U-turn and announced within 24 hours that he would pass a new law that restores the independence of the affected anti-corruption agencies. That law is expected to come into effect as early as this week. Ukrainian civil society actors have taken this as a positive sign and have argued that the president's responsiveness to mass protests illustrates the resilience of Ukrainian democracy, where grassroots political organizing evidently has the capacity to constrain bad policy making. I visited a smaller demonstration in Odessa last Thursday where over 100 attendees called for greater anti-corruption measures. The crowd chanted that Ukraine must remain united and that if the war on corruption is lost, the country will be no better than Russia. Here is what one of the attendees had to say about the scandal.
We understand that this is no time for some kind of revolution during war, right? And this is not our goal to overthrow the government or something like this. This is very important. But in the same time, we don't want to become like Russia, because this is what we are fighting for in this war. We are fighting for our freedom. And that's why it's very important, even during war, to maintain this democracy. We have a better situation with corruption because now people don't tolerate corruption this much when we understand how we should use our money to support our armed forces and so on. In the same time, we still have some problems with corruption, so that's why we still have to work on it. And that's why we are so serious about this law. Because we had some success, like moderate, but we had some success in fighting corruption, and now they want to take us back like 10 years before. That's why we don't need this law. We want president to veto it. This is our critical distinction from Russia. We have democracy, and this is very important for us to talk to our government. If we are not agree, we want them to listen to us.
Ukraine is making incremental institutional improvements and slowly rooting out corruption from its government and bureaucracy. While Zelensky's disastrous misstep shook the confidence of supporters in this respect, the fact remains that everyday Ukrainians were able to step in and, through the power of mass protest, put the country back on track. I'm Zivo, reporting from Odessa, Ukraine, for the News Forum.